Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Some people are still arriving, but we will make a start. We currently have just over 50 attendees and it's rising, so that's a great start for us this afternoon. Thank you all very much for attending this session. My name is Sally and I am Partnership Manager with Shared Interest. And thank you for joining our Finance with a Human Face webinar, which is taking place on day 2 of Ethical Consumer Week. So welcome if you're joining us as part of the week, and also to all of you joining us today. I'm joined by colleagues who are supporting with the Q&A and tech behind the scenes, so thank you very much to them. And we're also joined this afternoon by Andy Ashcroft, Managing Director of KoolSkools, and we'll hear more about his story and KoolSkools' story in a little while. As I mentioned, we're on day 2 of Ethical Consumer Week, and there will be some links coming through in the chat, and we will share those with you if you wish to have any more opportunities to join any of the other webinars taking place over this week. And also the in-person Ethical Consumer Conference is taking place on Friday this week in London. For any of you attending that, I'll be delighted to meet you in person. I will be attending with a stall for shared interest in the marketplace area, so do please come and say hello if you're attending the conference. Do feel free to ask questions at any point during this afternoon session. If you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you will see a little Q&A button. You can submit your questions there and we'll do our best to answer them as we get to that part of the webinar. So we have framed this webinar within the theme of Ethical Consumer Week, and what we're going to be doing in this webinar is really addressing one of the questions that Ethical Consumer are approaching and tackling through Ethical Consumer Week, and that is reinventing business models. What if all corporations were cooperatives or social enterprises? And so that is really the purpose of this session, to share with you the examples of the work of Shared Interest as an organisation, also some brief case studies of some of the cooperatives that we support. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing a little bit more about the story of KoolSkools and their approach to business as well. So to start off, where did Shared Interest come from and how are we here? So we were founded in 1990 in the northeast of England. So we are celebrating our 35th anniversary this year, or we have been, what's left of the year. We are what we consider an ethical lender. So we lend finance, but on terms that are ethical. We act cooperatively, hence that has always been the foundation of our business model as an organisation. And currently we have investment from over 10,000 individuals here in the UK who are lending us some spare capital, some spare money that they may have. And collectively, that share capital has reached around £50 million. We're based in the UK, that's where our main office is, but we also have colleagues around the world in Kenya, Ghana, Peru, Costa Rica, and very recently a colleague joining us from Côte d'Ivoire. We're a strong supporter of Fairtrade and a member of the World Fairtrade Organization. We're also a founder member of an entity called the Council on Smallholder Agricultural Finance. So very much key within that system of supporting smallholder farmers and the cooperatives that they're part of with the much needed finance that helps them carry out their business activity. We've been recognised with a Queen's Award on 3 occasions, and earlier this year we're delighted to receive our first King's Award. So we were founded by two key innovators, if you like, two very visionary individuals, Richard Anderson and Mark Hayes, along with others who were evolving the idea of shared interest back in the late 80s. And I think one of the best ways to tell that starting story is actually to let them tell that story. So we've got a very couple of minutes of a short video here to help them tell us how we started and why we created this pioneering model, really, that is the model that we still have today.
When I was running Tradecraft in the early 80s, we were getting actually quite a lot of our finance from one of our producers in Bangladesh. They were giving us 6 months credit, and this didn't quite seem right. It helped us grow the business, but it was a little uncomfortable. We knew that a lot of our customers wanted to lend us money to support this process of giving the producers credit rather than the other way around. So I remember one day we went with my finance director down to the local branch, as there then was, of the Bank of England in Newcastle, and they were horrified. They said, "You can't start a bank, you know, it'd be a nightmare, no, 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 no." And I'm glad they did that, because in fact, that led us on when Mark Hayes wrote in with his experience to commission Mark to say, well, what's the way forward? And really, the rest is history.
It started with the Tradecraft share offer in 1984, in which I invested, and I was rather fascinated by the idea of a prospectus which offered the opportunity to invest to promote love, justice and equity in international trade. Tradecraft initially played a major role because we thought this thing would be part of Tradecraft. In the end, Shared Interest itself began by me moving into a small, scruffy office on the Elsick Road.
I can remember the day when Mark Hayes came into my office waving a piece of paper at me, and it was the registration agreement certificate to be an industrial and provident society. That was the point at which I knew we were going to be a success. We'd got the structure, we knew the money would then start flowing in. Getting the money out there, of course, was going to take much longer.
Hello from Ghana.
So that is just a taster, if you like, of our founding roots. You'll see that film carries on, and we will share the links to that full film in the follow-up email with you. But we just thought that gives you an interesting understanding, perhaps, of how we came to exist, and indeed the very pioneering, as I mentioned, model that we are operating in. So how did we get to where we are today from those origins? As I say, we were founded in 1990, and how did we get here 35 years later? So along with Richard and Mark, a group of Fairtrade pioneers really came up with the concept, as I said, in the late 1980s, with the organisation Shared Interest being established in 1990. In 1996 and 97, we began working with some organisations which would become long-standing customers of the organisation, including a Brazil nut cooperative in Peru, Candela, and a beekeeping honey cooperative in Chile, Apicoop. The initial foundings of Shared Interest Society that lends the finance to the producer organisations was something that Mark was wished good luck for when he was starting out with the initial idea of shared interest. His finance director of the organisation that he was working with at the time said, "You're trying to do the impossible, but good luck." In 1990, the first share capital that we had was £350,000, which enabled us to support 13 projects. By 1992, that share capital had reached £1 million and rose to 10 million in 1996. By 2020, we had reached 46 million in share capital, and currently it stands at around £50 million. So I think you'll agree it wasn't impossible. And that has indeed enabled us to achieve all of these things that you can see here, including developing those long-standing relationships. Then later in 2004, we established our sister charity, Shared Interest Foundation. In 2006, we saw the first of those colleagues outside of the UK recruited, with teams growing in Kenya and Costa Rica, followed in 2008 by colleagues in Peru. In Ghana, we recruited colleagues in 2012, and as I mentioned, most recently, this year, we have been joined by a colleague in Ivory Coast, in Côte d'Ivoire. We currently make payments to over 160 producer organisations. So because we are lending to those cooperative entities, we're lending to those existing businesses, not to individuals. And those organisations are spread across 47 countries of the world. So what does it mean for shared interest? The clue is in our name. So the model was very much set up, as you heard in that short video, to give people an opportunity to support Fairtrade producer organisations, to form a collaboration, if you like, with them. Connecting our customers, the organisations that we lend finance to, with our members, the individuals in the UK who are supporting us with their finance. And this is how we connect people who are unlikely ever to meet, but who share a vision of fairness, equality, and justice. Our members are also collaborating with each other. We act cooperatively, which means that we pool all of the investment that those individuals make, so that we are helping to spread the risk of the investments that we're making, of the loans that we're making. This really was crowdfunding before the term existed in its commonly used form today. We were very much pioneers of that as a concept, although it wasn't known or referred to as that at the time. We also work to provide our supporters with both a financial but a social impact as well, a social return on their loans, on the investments that they're making with us. So it's very much about having a shared interest in the success of the businesses that we're supporting. It's a kind of a community of support between our members and our customers. We are very much member-led. So we, as I say, we act cooperatively. We currently have over 10,000 share accounts, majority of those held by individuals, but also a small number by organisations, joint accounts, families, those sorts of non-individual type accounts. One member has one vote. So at our AGM, for example, people who have an account have an ownership of the organisation and can participate actively through our AGM, but also through other means of communications, receiving updates about our work, and also engaging with our membership team to ask questions about their accounts and what their investment is achieving. We also have a network of volunteers who support us in enabling us to connect with an audience here in the UK. That includes another way that we ensure our members are represented through our decision making in the form of our council. Our 4 chosen at random and 4 who have put themselves forward to be elected. The role of council is to represent and reflect the views of the membership and to ensure that the society is remaining truthful and faithful to its mission. We also have a network of volunteers who support us with a variety of roles across the UK. And again, in the chat, you'll be able to see some links to where you can find out more information about that activity. So just to summarize what I've shared there, another very short video here, just to illustrate how our model works and has continued to work for those 35 years.
Catherine and her family live in the UK. They work hard, send their children to school, and go to the doctor if they need to. They drink coffee and dream of a fairer world. Maria lives in Peru. She works hard but cannot afford to send her children to school or visit the doctor. Maria grows coffee and dreams of a fairer world. Catherine and her family have some spare cash and would like to use their money to support smallholder farmers in need. Maria is part of a cooperative, but only gets paid once a year and has to use expensive moneylenders in the months before harvest. Wouldn't it be good if Catherine and her family could lend some of the money they don't need right now to producers like Maria, and she could repay the loan when she'd sold her coffee? In 1990, we set up a special society to make this possible. Catherine and people like her in the UK put money into a share account, and we lend it to cooperatives that work with farmers and producers like Maria all over the world. It's called Shared Interest, and it's our way of investing in a fairer world. Last year, we sent £42 million from the pooled investments of our members, that's people like Catherine and her family, to over 166 Fairtrade organisations that include producers like Maria in 47 countries across the globe. And as they repay us, we lend the money again and again and again. Catherine and Maria really do have a shared interest, and you can too. With just £100, you can open a shared interest account and start investing in a fairer world. Catherine and
So that's a bit about us as an organisation and how our members engage, but a little bit more now about what we do with that finance. Where does it go? What types of organisations are using it? So because we work very much within the Fairtrade system, our lending is supporting cooperatives that have some kind of Fairtrade certification, or that we are satisfied comply with the principles of fair trade, whereby we carry out our own assessments. Because of that, many of you who enjoy fair trade will be aware of the types of products that are fair trade certified. A large proportion of our lending is going to coffee. Nearly half of our lending is going to support coffee cooperatives, with a slightly smaller but still significant proportion supporting cocoa cooperatives. So two of the biggest supply chains within the fair trade system. You can then see a variety of other commodities that are being produced, or products being produced by the organisations we're lending to. And that is indeed changing all the time. It is one of the ways in which we spread the risk involved in our lending, is to lend not only to a variety of different products, but also to different countries as well. So within cocoa, for example, we're lending to cocoa cooperatives all around the world, not just in a particular part of the world. So that means that we are able to spread the risk, but also the impact that we're able to have with our lending. So a couple of examples to share with you before I hand over to Andy to talk about the experience of KoolSkools. Co-operative are a coffee cooperative located in the Amazonas region. Co-operative stands for Cooperativa Agraria Rodrigues de Mendoza. The region, Rodrigues de Mendoza is the region that the cooperative are based in. Co-operative was founded in 1991, so similar age to Shared Interest, and started with 100 farmers who obtained organic and fair trade certifications in 2008. They became a customer of Shared Interest in 2010 when we provided finance to support them in exporting their coffee, so supporting them with the finance that they needed to get their coffee to market. And Co-operative have said that the finance that Shared Interest provides them with goes into them buying coffee from the farmers to be able to sell all year. To be able to export all year, we need to be able to supply. We need money to be able to supply. So they need the money to be able to fulfill the orders that they're receiving. In 2014, the cooperative experienced some internal challenges and soaring international coffee prices, which resulted in a high need for finance. And Shared Interest was the sole social lender supporting them at that time. For this reason, the current director of Couparm, said that Shared Interest is at the heart of Couparm, very much a key partner in supporting the cooperative with its growth and development. Unlike many coffee producers in the region, Couparm produce coffee continuously all through the year because their members have their coffee farms at different altitudes, so there is always a coffee harvest to be had. Because of that, there is a constant need for our finance to support them, to help fund pre-harvest activities and to collect the coffee from the farms, from the bushes. And then if we move to a different part of the world, Bukonzo is another coffee cooperative, this time in Western Uganda. Bukonzo is an organic farmer cooperative union founded by 6 organic coffee farmers who were keen to spread their message of environmental awareness, keen to pass on those ideals to others in their region. They began trading in 2011 and became a customer of Shared Interest in 2014. Today, their membership has risen to almost 2,000 members and has made a huge impact on the community. And it is one of the few coffee cooperatives in Africa managed by a woman. This is Jacinta, who you can see in the image. And Jacinta tells us that the loan from Shared Interest has allowed us to double our coffee sales and pay the farmers on time. With the increased income from coffee sales, the farmers have been able to educate their children. The strong relationship that we have built with Bukonzo has enabled us to respond to some of the challenges that they have faced. In 2020, many of their farmers suffered from severe flooding in the region, resulting in the destruction of their coffee farms and, in some cases, their homes. Through partnering with Shared Interest Foundation, Bukonzo was able to support their members by accessing the Livelihood Security Fund through the foundation, which enabled those farmers to rebuild and re-support themselves to get back into their activities, their coffee activities. So just as we pause there to reflect a little on what Shared Interest has achieved and how we operate in that kind of some of those supporting those working in some challenging contexts, we will come to learn a little bit more about KoolSkools, a UK-based organisation and customer of Shared Interest. But just before I end here, to say that reminder that I will be at the conference on Friday, so please do come along and say hello. And do keep an eye on the chat where there'll be some links coming through as well for other things that we're going to be mentioning here in the webinar. So I will now stop sharing to welcome Andy to join us to share his experience and his story from KoolSkools. So Andy is the Managing Director of KoolSkools, and I will now over to you, Andy, to talk about your work, and let me just bring up your slides as well.
Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Andy. I'm the Managing Director of a company called KoolSkools. As we say to the schools and the universities as we go around, as you can see, we're not very good at spelling. Hopefully we're a little bit better about something called Fairtrade. So just a little bit about me to start with. This is my second career. My first career was in the British Foreign Office, where I served overseas in 4 countries substantively: Oman, Israel, Zimbabwe, and the Dominican Republic, also covering Haiti. And the common denominator between my 2 careers, if you like, was in the last 2 of my Foreign Office postings, both in Zimbabwe and the Dominican Republic / Haiti. I was involved with small British government funded development projects, and one was able to see firsthand how bar very well targeted hard currency, so government money could go in terms of developing communities and what sort of a positive impact it can have. And the read across to our business now, KoolSkools is a fair trade clothing company. So the farmers that we are supporting obviously are fair trade organic cotton farmers. And our business is all about getting through to the roots of our chain, if you like, getting to know the people, in the cotton farmers and the factory workers that contribute to the making of our clothing. So if we can go on to the first slide, please, Sally. So there are two main elements to our business. When we conceptualized this business in 2009, 2010, what we did know is that we wanted to offer, if you like, an ethical alternative to the notoriously exploitative global clothing industry and the notoriously profits-driven school uniform market. And so amazingly, we started this business in 2010. We're based in Southampton. We started with one client school just down the road from us in Southampton. We brought our first genuinely fair trade certified garments into the UK from a wonderful factory called Craft Aid in Mauritius. That was the start of our manufacturing journey. And with a few bumps along the way, we've managed to maintain everything we've manufactured ever since the start of the business has been made with fair trade organic cotton, either 100% fair trade organic cotton or a mix of fair trade organic cotton and recycled polyester as it is now. Very shortly after that we started the business, one of the first client schools we started working with in Southampton asked us to come in and talk to the students about the sourcing of the cotton and the working with the ethical factory and so on. And so literally after my first school assembly, I came away thinking, gosh, this is actually something we should be doing. We should not only be selling fair trade clothing, but the students and the schools that are buying into this, we need to make this an educational experience. So that very quickly became one of our two USPs, one USP being fair trade school uniform. And believe it or not, amazingly, we are still, we're very kindly described on the Fair Trade Foundation's website as the UK's #1 fair trade uniform supplier. The truth is, we are still the only UK fair trade certified school uniform supplier, which is in many ways I find quite amazing and maybe a little depressing. But the second USP is going into schools and sharing our story with the students, going into schools and universities, because our second primary market is university clothing, which we developed into in 2019, 2020. In a fairly halting way to start with, because you'll realise that was on the brink of COVID kicking in, but we've had some successes since. And for example, we're now supplying fair trade clothing to the University of St Andrews, which is a fair trade university. So that's and we also roll out our fair trade education with our university students as well. Now, in that slide, you'll see two photos of schools in Scotland, and you'll be wondering how a company, a small ethical clothing company in Southampton, can be working with schools in Scotland. So if I tell you that we supply around about 150 schools UK-wide, and over 80 of those schools are actually based in Scotland. We've got a client school on the Isle of Skye, for example, in Ullapool in the Highlands, on Orkney, and Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire for the last 2 years has been our fastest growing market for our client schools, even surpassing those around us in Southampton and Hampshire. And we can go into more detail on why perhaps I think that might be the case perhaps later when we have a conversation, Sally. So Sally, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So all of the garments I've mentioned, all of the garments that we produce, carries the Fairtrade certification mark, Fairtrade cotton certification mark. We have had some challenges as a business, not least in 2019, in 2016, when our factory in Mauritius sadly went under. But this was when Fairtrade relationships really came to the fore. I mean, doing business on Fairtrade terms is a really, I could say, very, very pleasurable and good for the spirit sort of business, because you make long-term friendships and relationships that can often help you along the way, because there's a genuine pull behind the cause of helping the cooperatives, the farmers, and in our case obviously the factories and the factory workers. And when our factory went under in 2016, it caused huge challenges for us as a business. But a chance email from an old friend of ours, an Indian ethical businessman called Sri Rangarajan, that I was sent in early 2018, rekindled a friendship from the days when Ranga, as he's known, was the Fairtrade cotton product advisor at the Fairtrade Foundation just after we'd started our business, and just before he went back to India in 2012 to restart his career in Fairtrade and ethical manufacturing, cotton manufacturing. He came down to us in Southampton and said, look, I really like what you're doing with the education side of your business alongside the supply of the garments. And if you ever need any help, you just have to reach out to me. So Ranga was passing through London in early 2018. We were at the end of our tether as a business and struggling basically almost without a manufacturer. And Ranga came back into play and said, look, why don't you move everything over to India? The cotton is produced in India. We've got a factory supply chain, a much bigger factory for you to work with. And so really that was the saving of our business. And, that was one of those fair trade friendships, if you like, that really came to the fore at that time and very much saved our business. And we certainly made one of the best commercial decisions, I think, right at the start of our business, when we realized that if we were going to offer a fair trade certified school uniform, we couldn't, for example, compete with the likes of, let's say, Georgia Asda, who are offering 3 logo polos for £10 or something like that. So we decided that we would go down the road of hopefully a better than average quality of clothing for the markets, both in our case, obviously the schools market and the universities market. So better than average quality. And therefore, if the prices were a bit higher, we were, the schools that we were working with and the universities that we now work with will be confident that, if you like, we're not selling their customers, in the school's case, the parents, and in university's case, the students, we're not selling them a pup. And that sort of combination has worked very well for us. We're still a relatively small business, but we are growing. I'm pleased to say, just today, I've had a very important meeting for the business up here in Scotland at the University of Glasgow, which is a fair trade university, and we're trying to increase our outreach in the university sector now, as well as in the schools sector. So perhaps we can go on to the next slide, Sally, and I can explain how crucial actually the rekindled relationship with Shared Interest is. We have previously worked with Shared Interest with a biocredit facility from 2015 onwards, and that kind of lapsed when we were going through our problems as a business, just really trying to keep the business alive for a few years. But the shared interest support is absolutely crucial, because you will realize that as a school uniform business, we are a seasonal business. So we have to make sure that all of our stock comes in from India, all of our fair trade certified school uniform comes in from India by about April, May each year. And so that we can sell it through, and we're still selling it through. The key months for us, the sales months, are June, July, August, and well into September. Now that means every year that the big order that we place in the factory, and I'm going to India again in a couple of weeks' time to go and see the cotton farmers and visit the factory and put in our big school uniform order for next year. That means when that order comes in April, May, we have to try and pay for it before the our sales season starts. So for a small business, that means that's a huge challenge for cash flow. And that's where something like a buyer credit facility, as we're hoping to grow our business, because you only have to get 1 year's estimates and cash flow guess wrong, and you can be in serious trouble as a small business. So having that security of having the confidence of placing the order in November, December, putting a down payment on that order to the factory, because under Fairtrade apparel terms, when you place the order with the factory, you should be putting 50% down. And the idea there is that everybody in the chain, unlike if you like, a conventional fast fashion type clothing chain where the cotton farmers and the factories get paid last, the idea of Fairtrade is that all of those people contributing to the chain get paid decent money to start with. So we're more able to do that with that shared interest buyer credit facility. So it gives us that crucial breathing space, for example, to pay the factory in full by the time the uniform comes in April, May. And then at the end of our sales season, around about September, October, then we have got enough fat, if you like, to be able to pay shared interest back, them already having paid the factory. So this is, it's a real lifeline as we're wanting to grow the business. It is an absolute pleasure working with Shared Interest. They do become friends of your business, as I know they've become friends with many cooperatives worldwide. You get a dedicated account manager, and they're really with you, want to understand your business, and if you like, become friends of the business. And as I say, we're very grateful as a business to Shared Interest, because with our fairly ambitious growth plans, having that breathing space a couple of times a year when we're putting orders into the factory, but we need to pay the factory, but our sales season hasn't yet happened. It's a real game changer for us in terms of our growth ambitions. So I think that's probably hopefully gives you all an overview of our business and how we work. The only added thing I would say is that as a Fairtrade certified business, we want to go almost beyond the benefits of Fairtrade, and I'm sure most people tuning into this webinar will know that being Fairtrade certified, that means that the cotton farmers get a fair price for what they produce, and also community benefits through the Fairtrade social premium. So just this year, we've started a project that I've wanted to do since we started this business, which is we're starting to link up UK schools, our UK client schools that are very Fairtrade friendly, if you like, and their fundraising activities with some of the very economically challenged schools in our cotton and factory communities, to help develop education in those communities as well. And I suppose the last comment would be, I hope it is that we feel that as a business, we're not a social business, we're not a community interest company. We are a business, we're a Fairtrade certified company, and we feel that if we can develop these sorts of relationships and we can engage in this way right down through our chain, perhaps the larger corporates, the fast fashion companies and so on, maybe we feel they could do a bit more.
Thank you, Andy. That's fantastic to hear the journey that KoolSkools has been on and continues to go on. As an Aberdonian, I'm delighted to hear that Aberdeen is a good firm stronghold for you in terms of school engagement, which is great. We'll now move on to a bit of a conversation, really, to enable us maybe to unpack a little bit more about what you've shared there, Andy. But I would just invite our audience to submit their own questions through the Q&A function. So after Andy and I have shared our conversation, we will certainly come to any audience questions. So do submit those through to us. yeah, such a rich history, I think, of KoolSkools, and I think a fantastic story, as you say. Unfortunately, or otherwise, still the only UK Fairtrade school uniform provider. What motivated you to set up KoolSkools? Was there a particular moment or a particular situation that you really sort of thought, right, this is where I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to do.
Well, I think as I was thinking about, as I was having my midlife crisis and leaving the big government organization called the Foreign Office, I was kind of inspired by those development projects in developing countries, both in Zimbabwe and Dominican Republic, Haiti. And so I think it was almost like a natural, if I was going to move into business, which is my career anchor in the Foreign Office was actually trade development. So I was head of the commercial section in Zimbabwe, for example, and my role in the Dominican Republic, also covering Haiti as the British ambassador there, was predominantly a trade development one, but obviously also covering Haiti, there was a development rather than a trade development role. So those were kind of almost like my skill sets as I was leaving the Foreign Office. And so I think gravitating towards something involving fair trade, because I'd come across fair trade here and there in my Foreign Office career. As some people may know, for example, Zimbabwe produces fair trade flowers, and Dominican Republic produces fair trade bananas. So here and there in some of my field visits, I'd come across fair trade and seen how it works at that grassroots level. And obviously, I've seen many examples of that in the cotton farms that we visit very regularly. So it was, I wouldn't say it was one thing, it was almost like a gravitational pull, really.
A chain of events. I'm sure that rings true
Yeah.
for many in our audience in terms of how they engage with fair trade and the movement, is it comes from multiple strands. Yeah, excellent. Um, You've mentioned some of the challenges within the garment sector that KoolSkools are trying to address. You mentioned sort of fast fashion, I suppose, is the kind of the opposite almost. Um, in terms of the motivation of KoolSkools, what does socially responsible mean to you at KoolSkools? What does it mean to be a socially responsible business, and what would you like that to potentially mean for the sector?
Okay. Well, I think probably bringing it down to the human level. I mean, I couldn't conceive of running a business where the factory was just a name that was sending us product. I couldn't conceive of a business where the cotton, the main commodity going into our product, where we didn't know where it was coming from, and we didn't know how much the people at grassroots level got paid. It's just, for me, it would be complete anathema. So I think that's where I would start. And what we did, we have our own, if you like, ethical trading pledge that we ask our factories to sign up to. But having said that, with our supply chain and our factory chain in India, I would say that if I can get to know all of so the audience may not know that from the journey of cotton, when you harvest your cotton, there are actually 5 different factory processes involved in producing the clothes. So it first of all goes to a ginning factory where the cotton is cleaned. Then it goes to a spinning factory where it's spun into, in our case, fair trade organic cotton yarn. Then it goes to a knitting factory where it's knitted together with, in our case, recycled polyester. Then it goes to a dyeing factory, and then it goes to what we call a cut, make, and trim factory, which is where they cut the cloth and sew it together and make the garments, and over it comes. So I feel that as a small business, if we can get to know the individual factory managers and the factory workers in all of those factories, when I go to India in 2 weeks' time, I will spend a week living and working with the cotton farmers, talking with them about their challenges and how fair trade, benefits their communities and so on, and also to conventional cotton farmers, who I know there are many hundreds of thousands of conventional cotton farmers in India that would like to be part of the fair trade family. But because sadly, even though 70% of the clothes that we wear are made of cotton, less than 1% of those cotton clothes sadly carry the Fairtrade cotton mark. So we've got hundreds of thousands of cotton farmers in India that would like to join the Fairtrade family, but can't because there aren't enough companies doing this. I can't conceive of running a business where I don't get to know the people in the chain. And so I would start from there. And I would also contrast that with what I know to be, many big corporates or, fast fashion companies who often don't have the full set of their factories sorted. I mean, people will remember the Rana Plaza disaster back in 2013, where the factory collapsed and over 1,200 workers were killed. And the biggest corporate working with that particular factory was Primark. And at that time, there was great dismay that this was a Primark factory. And the key thing here was that this particular factory was subcontracted to do the work for Primark. So that's often where the problem lies, where if the primary factory is really, really busy, they might, hive off the work to subcontractors. And that's where the chain, when you get these big corporates, producing millions of garments, literally, then often the factory chain can be a little bit muddied and the transparency kind of disappears. But I just think it calls for, in terms of corporate social responsibility, there is no way that any clothing company, in a developed country should not know exactly how many factories they are working with and where they are and what their factory conditions are. I feel that if we can do it, they should be able to do it. If they should be able to do it with deeper pockets, put it like that.
Yeah, no, excellent. Absolutely. And I think probably the last question for this part of our session before we come on to some of the questions that our audience have asked. You mentioned obviously the model of KoolSkools very much is about the educational aspect of your work as well, in terms of engaging the schools and the pupils and students through universities as well. And kind of joining those together with the producers. You mentioned briefly at the end of your presentation about a new initiative that you're working on to really kind of connect those two audiences, those two groups. Can you tell us a little bit more about that side of the work and the kind of the impact that has on your work?
Yes, thank you. So we've done two, I'd say, fairly groundbreaking projects over the last couple of years. We're contracted by the National Union of Students Consortium, and together with National Union of Students charity funding, a couple of years ago, we embarked on a women's supervisors training project in our factory in India, which is based in a very conservative part of India, where single women and single mums in particular tend to be cast aside by families and the community. So our factory actually employs a large number of women, but very loyal and very, very good workers. But there's a bit of a glass ceiling in the clothing industry generally, where 85% of the seamstresses of the factory floor workers tend to be female, and the vast majority of supervisors and managers are male. So we deployed those funds, and there was a very, very effective years training project where head of our factory, Ranga, took about a dozen and a half of his most promising seamstresses and gave them a year's comprehensive training. The ratio of male to female at the start of the project was 16:4, so 16 male supervisors, 4 female, and the ratio today is 10 and 10. So that was very successful. And the other project is the school support project. For a very long time, and this plays into the education side of the business as well. I've wanted to link UK client schools that are very strong Fairtrade supporting schools with some of the primary schools. Like when I go into the cotton villages and I work with the cotton farmers during the harvest and talk to them, I always ask to go and see the local school, the village school. And they are almost invariably look the same. They look like mini sort of prison cells with bars on the windows, They've got no tables, no chairs. The children sit on the floor. There's just a blackboard, a piece of chalk for the teacher, one teacher amongst, several hundred kids. And so for we've managed to establish this year, working through our factory chain, that for £600 of UK school fundraising, they can have a massive effect on one of those village primary schools. So we've started with 6 of our kind of best Fairtrade supporting schools this year. You'll be pleased to hear that one of them is in Aberdeen, Sally. And I was there this week, and they gave me a check for their first school supported under the project. And this is something else that, of course, that helps to bring the supply chain and their school uniform, if you like, alive. So yeah, it's really helping us on the education side as well as obviously the business side.
Brilliant. Excellent. No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing more about that. I'm sure both of those initiatives will be of interest to our audience as well. Speaking of people being at the heart of all of this, let's turn to some of the questions that our audience have been asking us while we've been talking. So the first question is for me to answer. So you're off the hook on this one, Andy. I'll come back to you shortly. So the first question we've had is, how does Shared Interest find and link with new customers? So how do we find and link with organisations that need our finance? There are a number of different things that we do, and that role, those different activities and engagements are really performed by our colleagues who are based outside of the UK. So those overseas teams that I mentioned in Peru, Costa Rica, Ghana, Kenya, and Cote d'Ivoire. And those colleagues are engaging through events, through trade fairs, through opportunities to meet potential customers, so organisations that may need finance from Shared Interest. Because we're very much embedded within the Fairtrade movement, again, that is a community that we are known within. It may be that we receive referrals perhaps, or shared knowledge about Shared Interest between some of the organisations we're working with. So a number of different ways, but very much about people really at the heart of that, whether it's meeting people at events or being in communication with people through those teams in those regions. Andy, coming to you then for our first question from the audience. What happened to the workers in Mauritius when the facility there was closed?
Yeah, very, very good question. So we tried very hard. It was the worst possible timing for our business, because we just got equity funding on board in 2015, and we heard from the factory on the back of the funding that things were not going very well from a cash flow point of view. Craft Aid was actually one of the suppliers to the body shop. They used to supply the body shop with these Fairtrade little makeup, white gloves and socks and so on. So they had quite a good ethical customer base, but unfortunately at that time not enough people were putting in Fairtrade orders to them, and so they found cash flow very difficult. So the order that we put into Craft Aid on the back of our equity investment towards the end of 2015 was just about the last order that Craft Aid actually manufactured, and our order came into the UK in February of 2016, and sadly the factory went under in March the following month. So we tried very hard. We just purchased on the back of our equity funding. We just purchased a ton of Fairtrade cotton that had been shipped from India to Mauritius to Craft Aid. So it's a very long and complicated story, but the operations manager at the time, Bishwaj, set up his own manufacturing facility, and we worked with Fairtrade International, Fairtrade Africa, to get him Fairtrade certified. So he took as many of the workers from Craft Aid as he could to set up his new manufacturing facility. But sadly, over a period of time, the problem that you have when you set up a business like this is you want to do as much good as you possibly can, but ultimately you have to have a product coming in that is okay from a quality point of view and a market point of view, because it's obviously got strong ethical underpinning. It's Fairtrade certified, but we were having lots and lots and lots of quality issues, sadly, and that was gradually grinding our business down. So we had a stark choice, either to see our business go under by keeping manufacturing in Mauritius, or Ranga really came to the rescue and said, look, it's not going to work for you. I know you're trying to keep it going in Mauritius, but and I know that it's not going to last if you do that. So I'm bearing our soul as a business here, but this is generally what happens. So to keep the business alive, we had to move everything over to India. So, but sadly, some of those workers, unfortunately, would have had to find work back in sweatshop type factories in Mauritius. I have to be honest about that. But ultimately, as a business, even though it's hopefully a very, very ethical business, the business side has to work. Because if the business side doesn't work, it's like this with the schools. If we can't supply uniform that stands up in the market against the conventional uniform competitors, and it's not affordable, and hopefully in our case it's not at least as good quality, then we won't get anywhere. So that the business has to work. This is why I always stress to the students when I speak to them that first and foremost, fair trade is a business proposition. It's not a charity proposition, but it's a good, sustainable proposition, business proposition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a really helpful point to kind of reinforce, particularly given the initial question that I shared at the start of this webinar, which is one of those posed by Ethical Consumer about how do we build sustainable social businesses? And the key part of that, there's multiple parts of that. There's the social, but there's absolutely the business element, isn't there? And I think that's really, really key there. We have to do our jobs as businesses. Just being mindful of time, there are a number of questions that we're not going to get to, unfortunately. We will endeavour to answer these offline to those of you who have asked them. But just one final question that's coming my way to share briefly before we wrap up. So the question is whether members of shared interest get a return on their investment, or whether they can withdraw their capital. So two questions there, really. Yes, the return on members' investment is twofold. There is the social return, or the social impact. Much of what we've shared about the businesses that are being supported and the knowledge that impact is being achieved as a result of the members' finance. But yes, there is also a financial return. It is small. It is currently 0.25%. It does change, and it is something that we report through on our website, and it is then also agreed by our board on an annual basis. But if you'd like to know more about that side of things and how that works, then do feel free to get in touch. There are some details in the chat of how to get in touch with our colleagues with questions about membership. In terms of whether members can withdraw their capital, the answer is also yes. It is what we refer to as withdrawable share capital. So it is there for a member to withdraw at any point if they wish to. It is obviously a risk. It is an investment. We are not financial advisors, so we would caveat that. But again, if you have more questions about how that side of things works, do see the references in the chat there. I just want to say thank you, Andy, for joining us, for sharing your story at KoolSkools. Thank you to all of you, our audience, for joining us. Do please check out the other webinars taking place this week. If you are attending the conference in London, do come and say hello. It would be wonderful to meet you. If you are interested in learning more about other social sustainable businesses, some sources of more information, BAFTS is the British Association of Fairtrade Shops, which has some great Fairtrade businesses in there. Social Enterprise UK and Co-operatives UK are other places to help you identify businesses that operate these sorts of models. All UK-based businesses and covering a whole variety of sectors. So again, if you're interested in learning more about that type of model, check those out. We will follow up with an email with all of you. It will contain the recording, a short feedback form, and some of the links that we've shared through this session this afternoon. So thank you again. Good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us. We'll hopefully see you again sometime soon. Thank you.